Hi there, I'm Trish and today we're sewing the Ivy top. So this pattern is for knit fabrics. You're going to need something with horizontal, so crossbody, as well as a small amount of vertical stretch. So depending on the fabric you choose, it will change the look of the final garment. If you choose to use a lighter fabric, say for example what I'm going to sew in today, it's a merino wool, it's a 190 weight, so it's lighter. This is going to end up more like a semi-fitted top. If you choose something with a looser weave, a sweater knit, a hatchie, you're going to end up with something that's more like a jumper, a pullover, a sweater, wherever you come from. So the pattern is designed as a semi-fit and it is a raglan cut. Right, so I'm sewing this today with my serger, my overlocker, and I've got 4 threads of colour, and I've chosen to sew this today with contrast fabric. So I've just decided to sew mine in a black. You might choose different colours, up to you. I'm going to sew the whole thing in the same colour. The other thing you need to know is we will be needing to use our plain sewing machine to do some pin stitching, which is, some people call that an understitch, just to get the collar to roll. So make sure you have a ball needle in your sewing machine, but I'll discuss that further when we get to it. So set your serger up with 4 threads of colour that match. Our seam allowances are 6mm, 1/4 of an inch on this machine, and when you're ready we'll get started. I'm going to start with the sleeves. Now if you're sewing the sleeve as a one-piece option, so without the contrast, you can skip over this part. If you're sewing the sleeve with the contrast, regardless of whether you're sewing the cuff or the hem, this is where we're going to start. So the sleeve consists of 2 pieces. We have an upper sleeve and a lower sleeve. When we cut them out as a pair, which some people call 2 mirrors. So we've cut one this way and one this way for the upper, and we've done the same for the lower. We've cut one this way and one this way. So the main thing we need to think about when we're going to sew these together is that we have right sides together. And you'll know you've got the right piece. So we'll come to the hem. On one of the sides there's a small notch, so when right sides are together, that notch needs to match to the curves. So when right sides are together, that notch will match there on that curve lower part of the sleeve. On this side. So what we're going to do, and we're going to do this for both pieces, is we're going to take the sleeve and we're going to sew the upper sleeve, which is my grey, to the lower sleeve, which is my black, and just going to make sure that you've got this little triangle overlap at the beginning and end because of the seam allowance. We want the stitch line to be on the seam allowance at 6mm, 1/4 of an inch, and you're going to sew that into place with your serger. Now we don't cut off any fabric as we sew with this pattern, just make sure your blade is there to trim off any bits of ravelling fabric and to tidy up the edge. Now if you like an athletic look, you can certainly go ahead if you have a cover stitcher and do a cover stitch look on this, or a twin needle or a reverse cover stitch. That's also a nice look, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to go ahead and repeat this for the other side, and when I'm finished I'm going to press this with my iron so that that seam faces towards the hemline. When you've ironed both sleeves, you should have a pair of them that look like this. So now we're going to attach these to the back. If you're sewing the cuff version, Don't sew the cuff yet, we'll do that later. So let's sew the sleeve to the back. At the upper part of the sleeve, let's just look at it for a minute. On one side you'll have 2 notches. That shows us that this is the back. Don't worry about this notch here for now. And on this side there's a single notch which shows us the front. So what we're going to do, take a sleeve, find those 2 notches and place that right sides together to the back 2 notches. So here's our back piece, here's the neckline here, and on this side there's 2 notches, so that's the back. Don't worry about this, the 2 notches up here, they show us the centre back, and on this side there's another 2 notches. So what we've got to do is just make sure when the sleeve is right sides together that those 2 notches match. So when we have these 2 notches here matching, overlock serge that seam together. And because I'm doing this in contrasting colours, it makes it a lot easier. So we're going to sew on the other side now. So raglans can get a little bit difficult. Sometimes you can confuse the front from the back and the sides and the sleeves, and it can all get a bit much. But if you just take it slowly and do it step by step, you should be fine. And match the notches, of course. If the notches don't match, you can almost guarantee it's in the wrong place, or your fabric is not right sides together. Right. So when you've sewn those, what I'd like you to do is go to your iron and press that towards the back. So press those 2 seams towards the back, the centre back. Now we're going to work on the front, and the construction starts to get a little bit different from normal. So we're going to look for the upper front pieces. So there's 2 of them. They're cut as a pair. This is what they look like. So we've cut them out, one this way, one that way, 2 mirrors. And at the moment I have them right sides together. So we are going to look for the side that has 2 notches on it, one here and one here. Now this is a right and a left. Just hold that thought for a moment. So here is our lower front piece, and it has 2 notches on it as well, on each side of this triangular piece. We want to sew the right front upper on only at the moment, which is this side. It's the left side, as if you look at it, if you were wearing it, it would be the right hand side. So you need to place this right sides together with the piece that matches those notches to it. So this is the piece I'm looking for, like this, and when I place that right sides together, those notches will match. And we're going to overlock serge this side only. So when you're finished, this is what your piece will look like. And we want to go to our iron and press that seam so it faces towards the hemline. So here is our front piece with this side only, the right front sewn on. Now we want to sew the right, I suppose it's the shoulder, the raglan line. So we want to come up to this part here and look for the single notch. And we're going to place that right sides together to our sleeve piece here. So this is our front raglan seam on the right hand side as if you're wearing it, and we're going to overlock serge that into place. It's only a very short seam here. Now press that seam down towards the front hem. We're working on the collar pieces now, so there's 2 collar pieces and we cut each collar piece out as a pair. So we have 2 mirrors of the upper collar piece and 2 mirrors of the lower collar piece. So placing right sides together, we want an upper collar and a lower collar together. So we want a short one with a long one. Place them right sides together. Match the curves here, and we want to sew, overlock together the centre back neck, which is this short seam here, and we're going to do that for both pieces. Next we're going to place these pieces right sides together and we're going to sew the back collar into place. So place that right side up, then take the other one and place it right side down so we have right sides together. What this means is when we put those seams together, if you've done it correctly, the short ones should now be right side together and the long ones should be right sides together. Now we're going to sew the inner curve together. So here there's a notch, so we're going to match these 2 notches and match the seams and just overlock that seam as we go. Now we're going to move across to our plain sewing machine to do some pin stitching, which some people call understitching, just to help the collar roll. And it's really important you don't do this on the wrong side because you don't want to be unpicking this if you can possibly help it. So here we have our collar we've sewn together. This is the short end, this is the long end, and it's wrong side out at the moment. Turn it so that it is right side out, and we're going to be pin stitching on this side here. What we're going to do is pin stitch through all the layers on this side. To make it easier on myself, I've marked it just with a pin, and now I'm going to move across to my plain sewer. So pin stitching, some people call understitching, helps create roll for the collar to the wrong side of the garment. So for us, what we need to make sure is that we're stitching through all layers. So place the seam like that. We're working from the right side. And it's called pin stitch because we're going to stitch pinward in from the seam. Make sure you've put a ball needle in your machine, that you've lengthened your stitch length from normal, and make sure you test stitch on spare fabric before you begin. Especially important, we have a ball needle. We want that needle to push our fibres apart, and we don't want it to pierce the fibres and create a ladder because we're working with knit fabrics. The other thing I haven't mentioned about this collar is if your fabric is really soft, you can of course put a layer of fuse. So just refer to your fuse supplier, the correct fuse for your fabric type. So knit fuse requires a flexible, knit fabric requires a flexible fuse. You don't have to because it will stretch into place, but it will give a bit more firmness if your fabric's quite soft. Generally with collars, I automatically say we add fuse, but because it's a knit garment and this is a jumper combination, it really doesn't need it. But it's up to you. You can add fuse if you prefer to. Right, so let's just get started. There's no need to back tack, and just stitch pinward the way from that edge. What you will see when you pick this up now and you try to fold it is that the fabric has curled to the inside. So what you can do now is go to your iron and press that into place just so it sits really nicely. Now we're going to sew in our other upper front piece, which is our upper left front. So take that remaining small piece and come to the sleeve. So here is my neckline here. We want to attach this small seam here, which is going to be the front raglan. So making sure the notches match there, overlock, serge that seam together. Now before you go any further, mark that somehow so you know what you're working with. This will all become very clear in a moment. So that is the seam we've just sewn. So here is the sleeve and here is the upper front. So we've marked the seam here. It doesn't matter where you mark it, it's just so you don't get confused. Now we're about to sew on the collar we prepared earlier. Take the collar you prepared earlier and come to the short side. So we have the short side and the long side. Come to the short side and making sure you know which is the front and the back. So the back is the side that we pin stitch to, under stitch to. So place that collar piece right side together to the side front that we just prepared. So let's start matching this. Now you'll know you have the right piece if all the notches match. So there'll be a notch here towards the start. Excuse me, I'll just put some pins in. You will have another notch here that will match to the seam we've just sewn. And at this stage, of course, you can take out that pin or that marking position. And if you are going to pin, make sure you pin with ball needles and that the pins are within your seam allowance. Okay, so now we're going to go around the neckline area and make sure the notches match. Now from here on, what's going to happen is that there is now going to be a need to stretch. So there's no stretching for the seams we've just done, but from here on in there is some allowance for it because we're heading around the neck and we just need to gather that in slightly. So as you sew there, you'll just need to ease that into place. Okay, so we have a notch here where the sleeve joins to the back. And then the centre back neck seam, make sure you pop that on top of each other, and that will match to the double notches in the centre of the back. And you just follow the notches down the other side. So we have another notch here for the other raglan seam at the back. And stop pinning. Now it's very important you stop pinning at the far edge of the sleeve. So what this means is, here is the sleeve here, so just pin as far as that, and now we're going to serge it together. You'll see why in a minute. So to give you an idea, here's the centre back, and we want to serge off just before here. So you'll see I've just placed an image in the video to help you out to see what we're doing, and when you're ready, start overlock serging that into place. Alright, so as I'm approaching that far side of the sleeve, make sure you run your overlocking off before you get to the end of it. Now this is really only for the first time you sew this, because it will become a bit clearer, but what we're going to do now is fold some of the side we've just sewn to enclose it in the seam we're coming up to. So for the first time you do this, it's probably easy just to overlock off. We'll rearrange our work and then you can start overlocking again. But because it is a little bit confusing, I'm going to show you how to fold this together. Now when we re-overlock, we're going to, instead of going through 3 layers, we're now going to be going through 5 layers. So just bear that in mind too. Alright, so let's work out how to fold the place that we've just sewn into here. Place your garment right side up with the long collar on this side and the short collar on this side. So what we're going to do is place this right front over the left front and match those collars. So the seam we just serged off, you need to match to the top of the collar. I'm going to say the top of the collar. It's the seamed edge of the collar. And then as we come down, just match the notches. Right through to the bottom. So we've got 4 layers here. We're going to be repinning this in a second, and we're going to match it to the front. And then the 4 layers goes to the 3 layers as we move towards the side seam. So when you've got that right over the left, the next thing we have to do is bring this front edge up and match it as well. Now I'll pop a picture in to try and make it a little bit clearer. So now we're going to repin the 2 collars. We're going to match that centre front there. So the place where we overlocked off, we'll continue down and we'll now have 5 layers to go through. And then we'll meet the front, the lower front piece, and we're going to have 4 layers to go through, all the way through to the edge. So I'll just pin those and I'll come back to this in a second. When you have that pinned in place, come up to where you went off with your overlocking, and we're just going to just overlap that a small way and continue on. So where we came off, we're going to make sure that that collar part touches the notch, and then we need to make sure that all 5 of these layers are going to be caught as we sew. Now we're going to be losing a layer as we transition through to that triangular piece of the front. Just be a little bit careful of the seam bulk there, but we are going from 5 to 4 layers now. It's a good idea to make sure your seams face in opposite directions when you go over bulky seams like that. So as we approach the side seam here, just make sure you've got a little triangle overlap. Because if you have the triangle overlap, you will end up with a nice smooth transition like so. So what I mean by the triangle overlap is that you want the very edge of your stitching to meet at the edge of your fabric. So if you overlap it by a little triangle, it will work. So that's what we're looking for here. Now press that seam down towards the hem. So this is the stage we're up to now. Your front is completed, but we haven't sewn the side seams yet. And there's one more step we need to do before we do that, and that's this front left raglan seam. We need to stitch the over collar to the under collar part. Well, it's not really the under collar. We need to stitch the over collar side to this raglan part here on the left as you're wearing it. So you can use either, I'm going to use a cover stitch. It's with the top cover, so I'm using 5 threads. You could use a twin needle, you could use a reverse cover stitch, you could use a decorative stitch, but all we need to do is secure this top part to the bottom part along this raglan seam. I've set it up ready to go with the correct tensions, and as always with cover stitching, I hold my breath before I start. I love this machine, but it has been a learning curve. Right, so all I've done is I've butted this top collar to that raglan seam. I'm going to stitch past it so I can unpick it to the back and just get the ending beautiful. So there we go. Bad idea. So there is my cover stitch seam. I'll go and tidy that up now and get back to you. When you've finished your cover stitch or your twin needle, however you want to secure that, now we're going back to sewing more of the traditional raglan method again that you know. So we're going to sew the side seams. I'm going to sew from the wrist. I'm going to place these sleeves right sides together. I'm going to sew from the wrist all the way through to the hemline. I'm going to match the underarms and the colours as I go. This is the same for whether you're doing the cuffed version or whether you're doing the just the hemmed sleeve version. So when you're ready, just place those right sides together and overlock serge those seams. And don't forget to repeat that on the other side seam. I'm now going to sew the hems. So this is the hem version. If you're sewing the cuffs and the waistband version, you don't use this one. So we have 2 centimetre, which is 3/4 of an inch hem allowances. What I've done is I've gone to my iron and pressed up the hem by that amount. There's also notches on the pattern to help show you the position. There is a slight curve at the back of this garment, just for fitting ease. So when we sew the hems, you can use whatever method you prefer. You could use a twin needle. I'm going to use a 3-stitch on my cover seam machine, only because I've got all the settings already set up, ready to go. Or you could use one of the stretch stitches on your home sewing machine. To sew the sleeve hems, I always find it easier stitching with the needles on the inside. So long story short, it's much easier to do if you turn your garment inside out. And then we just place this under like so and stitch exactly the same way that we did for the hem. let's sew a cuff. Here are the cuffs. You have two and they're rectangles, and at the middle of one edge you'll have a notch top and bottom. So fold your cuff right sides together so that the notches are on the fold, and then overlock this edge together. Now go ahead and repeat that for the other cuff. Turn the cuff back on itself so that you have wrong sides together, and match the seams, and then opposite the seams there are notches. Match the notches. Making sure your garment is inside out, come to the cuff area and place a cuff inside that wrist and match the seams and match the notches. Now we're going to overlock these 3 layers together. Be careful when you come to the area here with all the seams because there's bulk. You just need to make sure that the seams face in different directions. The other thing you need to know is you will need to stretch the cuff slightly to fit into place. Now when you overlock this, it's a good idea to not start from the seam. And go ahead and repeat that for the other cuff. Our waistband is one long rectangle, so fold it so right sides are together and we're matching the short edges, and then overlock those edges together. Now fold again wrong sides together so we have a tube. It's a good idea at this stage to start matching points. So this seam here is going to match to the left hand side as we wear it. Directly opposite you will find 2 notches, and those notches are going to match to the right hand side seam. And then in between those 2 notches you'll have another set of notches, and on one side it's going to be the centre front, and on the other side it's going to be the centre back. Take your garment and place your waistband to the hem area and pin that into position. Now there is going to be stretching involved here. There is around about an 85% stretch on this. Oops. So you can see the difference here. As you sew, you need to stretch that into position. So just match those points together. So we're matching the side seams, and we're matching the centre front and the centre back. So I'm sewing with a 225 weight merino wool today, and it's very curly around the edges, so I'm going to take my time. When I overlock this, I'm just going to start to one side of the left hand side seam, and I'm going to sew it with the band on top and just gently ease between those positions. If you find your fabric is curling, you can certainly go to your plain sewer and run a tack stitch around that within the seam allowance just to hold it in place before you tackle it with the overlooker. So just like that, we're finished. Hey, thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoy your garment. Don't forget to go and give it a final press. If you haven't already, consider joining my Facebook pattern discussion group. It's a great way of seeing what people have made and also join in the discussion. Plus you get notifications of sales and new releases. And if you like what you see, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and you'll get more of the same, free videos and also hints, tips and tutorials. So I hope to see you again soon.